The North Atlantic in early 1942 was a realm of brutal extremes, a vast, indifferent arena where the war at sea would soon reach America's doorstep. For the crews of Germany's U-boats, the journey across this tempestuous ocean was a relentless test of endurance, a prelude to the storm they would soon unleash. On January 9th, 560 nautical miles east of Cape Cod, U-123, commanded by the determined Reinhard Hardegen, battled a snowstorm of monstrous proportions. Winds of force 6 whipped 10-meter seas into towering walls of water. On the bridge, Watch Officer von Schroeter clung desperately, lashed by icy spray and the constant threat of being swept overboard by bruising cold rollers and angled curtains of snow. The twin wind collars offered little protection as waves exploded over the conning tower. Hardegen, known to his men as the Old Man, emerged briefly, a grim observer of the chaos before ordering the watch below. "I'm going into the cellar," he declared, and U-123 plunged beneath the fragrant hell of the surface into a sudden, eerie calm. Yet below decks, the respite was relative. Crewmen were still thrown about like puppets, some puking into buckets from the lingering seasickness. The air was always humid, where fog glowed around all the lamps, and one had to cut away the mold before eating Hannes's bread. In the engine room, Chief Diesel Mechanic Karl Latislaus and his crew toiled in an oily, stinking world, tending the powerful man Diesel's beers, 6 hours off, not knowing where the hell we are, or what the hell we are, or what the hell we are doing, living by the klaxon of the control room telegraph. Karl Country appeased. His men had not seen the sky in 2 weeks. Further aft, mixers performed a formal surgical procedure on a grease-streaked eel, a G7E electric torpedo, its innards exposed. This sinister thing, costing 40,000 Reichsmarks, was inherently dangerous. Its Pi 2 pistol with corroding zinc lever caps was alive, vulnerable to premature detonation, a risk that could lead to a catastrophic boom. Hardegen preferred setting torpedo depth as shallow as possible, a calculated gamble against malfunction. Amidst this grinding routine and constant peril, a critical strategic shift was underway. At 2300 hours German time, on January 9th, Signals Officer Rafalski brought an urgent wireless intercept to Hardegen. Decryption revealed a signal from Admiral Donitz Badiou, assigning U-boats to specific attack areas with Roman numeral designations, a clear operational focus towards the North American coast. The signal was for Gruppe Polkenschlag, instructing them to commence attacks on January 13th. Hardegen, elated, announced to his officers that Attack Area 2 corresponds exactly with the initial target zone in our operation order, New York to Atlantic City. German U-boat commanders were motivated by the strategic imperative to disrupt vital Allied supply lines and exploit what they perceived as glaring vulnerability. The severe North Atlantic weather, while initially hindering U-boat operations, had also battered Allied shipping, particularly older vessels like convoy SC-34, creating opportunities Hardegen believed might save his precious torpedoes for better targets. The United States, despite having entered the war, was dangerously unprepared for a direct naval threat on its own shores, a vulnerability about to be brutally exposed. Pre-war U.S. naval doctrine had focused almost exclusively on surface fleets and aircraft carriers, largely neglecting investment in anti-submarine warfare capabilities and infrastructure. A prevailing bias favored larger, more prestigious vessels over the smaller, numerous anti-submarine craft that would prove vital. As one naval officer lamented, "We were just plugging along to find out what sort of anti-submarine craft we wanted, in case we needed them. And then all of a sudden, by God, we were in the war." Allied intelligence, though intercepting distress signals and aware of U-boat movements, initially failed to effectively track and anticipate the full concentration of U-boats off North America. British analysts like Wynne and Beazley at the Admiralty's submarine tracking room had already deduced the approach of 5 740-ton U-boats, identifying this as Polkenschlag. But US identifying this as Polkenschlag. Naval intelligence, despite its own magic capabilities, struggled to operationalize this vital information, leading to a dangerous complacency about American coastal security. The commencement of Operation Drumbeat Pokenschlag on January 13th marked the beginning of a devastating new chapter, shattering any illusion of American security. The reception of the Better-U signal was a critical strategic turning point for Germany, signaling a full-scale assault. The first tangible evidence of this U-boat threat to American waters came with the successful sinking of the SS Cyclops by U-123. After a methodical approach, Hardegen's U-123 launched its first torpedo at 0149 hours CET on January 12, striking the Cyclops with a resounding whack, followed by a black-and-white explosion cloud. Despite the chaos, the Cyclops' radio officer courageously transmitted a distress signal. It was intercepted by both U-123 and Allied intelligence, yet it failed to galvanize a sufficient defensive response. The crippled Cyclops eventually sank after a coup de grace, leaving behind typical surface detritus of planks, stores, ropes, cork life preservers, clothing, and coal dust, and a human cost that was immediate and brutal. As U-123 continued its audacious approach, the crew observed a scene that would become emblematic of America's profound unpreparedness. Gazing with stupefaction and thrill, Hardegen and his men beheld the luminous spectacle of the incandescent skyline of Manhattan and its neighboring boroughs. The sky at 330 degrees was ablaze. A huge silver scrim, thrown up by a million lights, dazzled the waning moon. Offering a stark contrast to Germany's darkened cities, Hardegen noted, "You just imagine to yourself America, and there it is." I cannot describe the feeling with words, but it was unbelievably beautiful and great. I would have given away a kingdom for this moment if I had had one. We were the first to be here, and for the first time in this war, a German soldier looked out upon the coast of the USA, even fantasized about walking around Times Square. The brightly lit shorelines and unescorted shipping signaled a dangerous complacency, a nation operating as though peace had been declared. This act therefore sets the stage for a period of profound vulnerability for the Allies, with U-boats poised to exploit American unpreparedness and a significant intelligence gap. The Pokenschlag offensive, driven by German strategic boldness against an ill-equipped and complacent foe, would usher in what many would later call the greatest maritime massacre in her history. A brutal awakening to the realities of total war on America's very doorstep. The Pokenschlag offensive, unleashed by German U-boats in early 1942, was not merely a series of attacks. It was a maritime massacre, a brutal one-sided engagement fought off America's own coast. It exposed a nation dangerously unprepared, its naval doctrine under Admiral Andrews' Eastern Sea frontier, adopting a passive cover-up and wait strategy even in the face of explicit warnings. Hardegen and his crew aboard U-123 had already marveled at the incandescent skyline of Manhattan, a luminous spectacle that signaled a profound, almost criminal complacency. Coastal cities remained ablaze with light, illuminating easy targets for German U-boat commanders, while many American freighters steamed on, devoid of the U.S. and on devoid of the U.S. Navy gun crews that might have offered a modicum of defense. The vulnerability was stark, exemplified by the sinking of the Norwegian tanker Nornes so close to shore. Its aft, broadcast into the frigid Atlantic, was met with a slow, reactive U.S. abaft, broadcast into the frigid U.S. abrictive U.S. apast U.S. Navy response, focused on rescue rather than aggressive engagement. The U-boats, despite their own technical frustrations, with notoriously unreliable torpedoes, prone to premature detonation or running too deep, operated with chilling impunity. Hardegen's near-grounding of U-123 near Rockaway Beach, a panicked emergency maneuver to avoid the very shoreline, highlighted not only the U-boat's audacious proximity, but also the utter absence of any immediate U.S. defense. The subsequent sinking of the British tanker Coimbra further underscored this tragic pattern, its oil and flame erupting high into the sky, a beacon of Allied shipping's profound vulnerability. But it was the attack on the SS Gulf America that truly became the last straw. This 8,081 GRT tanker, equipped with its own guns, yet offering no defensive fire, was struck and abandoned. Radio operator William M. Maloney, already a survivor of one torpedoing, sent desperate calls. Rescuers, like George W. Jackson, would forever remember reaching into the burning water to rescue a seaman, only to have the man's flesh come off the arm as he seized it. A grisly testament to the inferno, the red glow in the sky, from the flaming tanker, served as a grim, undeniable reminder of the war. This singular, dramatic event forced a desperate measure: the immediate cessation of all East Coast oil tanker traffic for the remainder of April, forcing the Allied war effort to live off its capital. This period, which U-boat crews grimly dubbed the happy time, was characterized by devastating Allied shipping losses, particularly oil tankers, and a profound humiliation for the US to profound humiliation to Rye Navy. The author frames Drumbeat not as a battle fought and lost, but as a set-piece engagement, that the US a dial found those into one die. Military chose not to make a battle of it at all. Off the coast of Florida, where U-boats dominated, the happy time took on a dramatic, terrifying backdrop of vulnerability and fear. Commander Hardegen, in U-123, slipped past the St. Mary's River border. Patrolling off the illuminated Florida coast near St. Augustine, he described the scene as having a silent, sleepy cast, with resorts, cabanas, and even automobiles cruising on the beach itself, casting white reflections on the dancing waves. He famously joked about seeing a little girl in the third beach chair from the left, emphasizing their extreme proximity to shore, a situation totally crazy and unseen elsewhere in the war. Then, on April 11th, a torpedo from Hardegen's U-boat struck a 12,500 GRT tanker near Jacksonville Beach, a mere 4 nautical miles from shore. The western sky erupted in a blinding red and yellow explosion. The tanker a torch that broke apart in the middle, illuminating the beach as brightly as though it were noon. Vacationers poured out of hotels and entertainment venues. Their frivolity quickly turned to horror as they beheld the funeral pyre at sea. Witnesses like Miles Zig Ziglar and Edward Musalem described the stupefaction of revelers, grappling with a war they had considered remote, a distant conflict suddenly brought to their very doorstep. Hardegen then surfaced U-123, bombarding the burning tanker with his 4-inch gun from a mere 250 meters. The muzzle flash ignited the sea of spilled oil around them, nearly roasting the U-boat crew. As the tanker spat twisted red columns like a volcano, and a pall of black smoke rubbed out the stars. Admiral Donitz himself would later describe how bathers and sometimes entire coastal cities are witnesses to the drama of war, whose visual climaxes are constituted by the red glorioles of blazing tankers. This period implicitly debunked the notion that American coastal waters were secure and well defended, revealing a dangerous complacency and a harsh reality of a paper fleet status. The success of Drumbeat was primarily a catastrophic failure of US operations and command, not solely due to superior German intelligence or overwhelming technological superiority. America was open to the greatest maritime massacre in her history, facing immense losses and a growing public and internal crisis that would soon demand a profound and painful re-evaluation of its entire war strategy. The escalating maritime massacre off the US East Coast had become impossible to ignore, a wound bleeding across the nation's perceived invincibility. Public outcry mounted, the desperate question echoing from every coastal town: where was the Navy? The initial hidden blows strategy, a cynical attempt to reassure a frightened populace by claiming secret U-boat sinkings, had spectacularly backfired, creating a big lie that only deepened public distrust. By April 1, 1942, the Navy's claims of 28 U-boats, sunk and presumably sunk in U.S. claims, in U.S.'s One Bulls, or Caribbean waters, were a demonstrable falsehood. Not a single enemy submarine had been confirmed destroyed. This stark reality, coupled with the daily sight of burning tankers, underscored the desperate need to restore public confidence. Even across the Atlantic, alarm bells rang. Winston Churchill, deeply concerned by the very heavy sinkings in the western North Atlantic, cabled Harry L. Hopkins, prompting President Roosevelt's immediate assurance that the matter was being given urgent consideration by Stark, King, and me. The pressure was building, forcing a slow and often reluctant re-evaluation of US in often reluctant repair. Naval strategy from the highest echelons. Yet, despite these clear warnings and the invaluable hard-won experience, freely offered by the British, the US, and the USL Navy, under the rigid command of Admiral Ernest J. King, initially resisted implementing proven anti-submarine warfare tactics. King's preoccupation with the Pacific theater, a legacy of pre-war doctrine, led him to critically underestimate the U-boat threat on America's doorstep. This bias resulted in the diversion of crucial destroyer assets, vacuuming them away from the vulnerable East Coast for distant convoy duties, leaving coastal waters dangerously exposed. The US adduced to US. Navy's initial response was characterized by a stubborn refusal to adopt convoy systems and a reliance on costly experimental strategies. In a desperate bid to counter the unseen enemy, President Roosevelt personally initiated Project LQ, the development of Q ships, heavily armed vessels disguised as unarmed merchantmen. This was done despite the Navy's deep skepticism about their limited past success and the grim reality that Q-ship crews were considered expendables, not expected to survive longer than a month. Amidst this strategic paralysis, moments of intense combat and intelligence breakthroughs began to reveal the precariousness of the war at sea, and slowly, the path towards an effective defense. One such harrowing encounter unfolded in the shallow waters off Florida. On April 11th, the USS Dahlgren, a Susan-class flush-decker destroyer, was sweeping for U-boats after aircraft had dropped flares. Commander Reinhard Hardegen in U-123 heard the distant distress calls. Noting in his war diary, "She must have seen us by the last parachute flare. It's about time to clear out of here and head to sea." Suddenly, a suspicious shadow on the port side forced a desperate alarm. "We never had such a crash dive." Hardegen tumbled through the hatch as a single-engine plane was almost on top of us, the U-boat hitting bottom at 20 meters in only 22 meters of water. Trapped, Hardegen whispered to his number one, "Prepare to destroy Schlussel's Nober rotors, cipher books, and all confidential papers. Pass the word in whispers fore and aft to don escape gear. Have all hands move quietly toward the control room. This time I don't think we're going to make it." Chief Engineer Schultz reported the devastating damage. "All the head valves have burst open, Hercule. We're losing air. You can hear it bubbling to the surface." The destroyer's got a big bubble patch upstairs to home on. The menacing swish, swish, swish of the oncoming destroyer's screws filled the submerged U-boat directly overhead. Every man stood alone with his thoughts or prayers. Yet, inexplicably, the Dahlgren didn't drop a thing. Hardegen, astonished, thought the American had them dead on. Crewman Rafalski later quipped a British destroyer would have worked over the area repeatedly for a regulation 36 hours. From the brink of despair, Hardegen initially thinking, so this was the end. Now we would get to know Mr. Roosevelt's hospitality after all, found a fierce resolve. "I have decided that we are going to save this boat." Power on. Emergency lights on. With the roar of the compressors, expelling water from the tanks, the damaged hull lifted briefly, screeched and groaned, bounced on the bottom, then lifted again and became buoyant. Hardegen surfaced, surprised that the enemy was not tougher. As his exhausted crew, immensely relieved, slept the sleep of the redeemed. This precariousness was not limited to Allied vessels. Even for the Germans, the war at sea held devastating surprises. As illustrated by the tragic sinking of the blockade runner Spreewald, due to a devastating combination of misidentification and communication errors, the vital German cargo ship, laden with rubber and tin, was torpedoed by U-333, a German U-boat. This friendly fire incident, a tart entry in the German war diary, highlighted the chaotic and unforgiving nature of naval war diary. Highlighted the chaotic and unforgiving nature of naval war diary. Highlighted the chaotic and unforgiving nature of naval war diary. Highlighted the chaotic and unforgiving nature of naval war diary. Highlighted the chaotic and unforgiving nature of naval war diary. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a critical intelligence breakthrough was taking shape. The establishment of the Atlantic Section Intelligence Center, OP-20G, later designated F-21, marked the beginning of a coordinated Atlantic-scale U-boat tracking effort. Cloning the highly effective British OIC submarine tracking room, this new center, utilizing a network of USN double-T intercept stations, was a crucial step towards understanding and countering the U-boat threat. However, this nascent effort was immediately complicated by a significant settle cover: the Kriegsmarine's introduction of a fourth rotor to the Enigma machine, creating the Triton, or Shark, code. This innovation temporarily rendered Allied code-breaking semi-blind to U-boat movements, exacerbating the threat and making the new tracking center's work all the more critical as it struggled to piece together the U-boat puzzle with incomplete information. By the spring of 1942, the U.S. Navy was facing immense pressure from all sides: the public, the President and its British allies. The moment of reckoning arrived when Commander Roger Wynne, the brilliant, hunchbacked director of the British OIC's submarine tracking room, confronted Admiral Richard S. Edwards, King's Deputy Chief of Staff, who had stubbornly insisted the US would learn their own lessons. Wynne delivered a blunt, irrefutable truth. "The trouble is, Admiral, it's not only your bloody ships you are losing. A lot of them are ours." This direct challenge, backed by undeniable evidence, finally broke through the bureaucratic inertia. King's eventual agreement to implement convoy systems, enforce shoreline blackouts, and establish a dedicated U-boat tracking room marked a turning point. Grudgingly, and far too slowly for the thousands of lives already lost, the US Navy began to accept external advice and mobilize its vast resources, finally confronting the existential threat on its doorstep. The relentless happy time for Germany's U-boats, a period of devastating and near uncontested destruction off America's coast, had finally pushed the US Navy to a reckoning. The very heavy sinkings that so concerned Winston Churchill, and the public outcry demanding, "Where was the Navy?" had finally forced Admiral King and his staff to confront the brutal reality. Commander Roger Wynne's blunt challenge to Admiral Edwards, that it's not only your bloody ships you are losing, a lot of them are ours, had undeniably shattered the illusion of American exceptionalism and naval self-reliance. Grudgingly, the US Navy began to implement the proven strategies it had initially resisted: coastal convoy systems, shoreline blackouts, and a dedicated U-boat tracking room, built as a clone of Wynne's British OIC. The shift was immediate and profound. On April 1, 1942, a partial convoy system, dubbed the Bucket Brigade, was inaugurated. This tentative start rapidly expanded into a full coastwise system, fundamentally altering the U-boat threat. The first southbound convoy, KS-500, departed Hampton Roads on May 14th, followed a day later by the northbound KN-100 from Key West. By July, a northern link from New York to Halifax and critical Caribbean convoy links were established, with the Galveston, Mississippi Key West connection completing the network by August. This massive undertaking aimed to sail a 45-ship convoy every 3 days, concentrating targets and allowing escorts to be truly effective. The impact was stark. Losses in the eastern frontier plummeted from 23 in April to 0 by July, a dramatic reversal that King himself, in a belated but emphatic declaration, would later call the only way to defeat the submarine menace. Beyond the official naval efforts, a distinctly American volunteer spirit began to fill the gaps. The US. Navy, initially skeptical of civilian assistance, finally embraced the hooligan Navy, a diverse fleet of private small craft, from yachts to fishing boats. By June 1942, the Coastal Picket Patrol had integrated 36 seagoing yachts, manned by privileged amateur admirals, businessmen, professors, college boys, deep-sea charter operators, Ernest Hemingway out of Cuba, ex-bootleggers and rum runners. These volunteers, operating within the 50-fathom curve, expanded coastal patrols, equipped with depth charges and machine guns, their silent running a distinct advantage. Simultaneously, the Civil Air Patrol, CAP, initially dismissed by some naval staff as a scheme promoted by the builder of pleasure aircraft, proved its worth. Flying bright yellow bees, often with garage-built bombsights, CAP pilots provided their own maintenance and wore specially devised uniforms. They flew tens of thousands of missions, reporting U-boat positions and claiming definite damage or destruction to 2 enemy submarines, though at a cost of 90 airplanes and 26 fatalities. This embrace of civilian ingenuity and patriotism, though delayed, significantly expanded the reach of American coastal defense. As the new systems took hold, the first confirmed U-boat sinkings in U.S. Czech waters provided a much-needed morale boost and tangible evidence of the tide turning On April 14, 1942, the USS Roper, a destroyer, detected U-85 via radar at 2,700 yards. The U-boat, despite its evasive maneuvers and a torpedo narrowly missing the Roper's port side, was caught in the destroyer's powerful searchlight. A hail of machine gun iron rattled against the tower and stern casing. As the Roper's crew, well pleased with themselves, delivered an 11-charge barrage, the U-85 was sunk, marking a symbolic and tangible shift in anti-submarine warfare capabilities. A clear message that U-boats were, indeed, beatable after all. Less than a month later, on May 9th, the cutter Icarus, a smaller U.S. craft, achieved another critical victory against U-352. After a mushed-sound contact, the Icarus's depth charges forced U-352 to broach stern down, grounded in 120 feet of water. Machine gun fire greeted the surfacing U-boat, and survivors, including one with a severed leg, abandoned ship in clock-like precision. Lieutenant Commander Maurice D. Jester, the Icarus's skipper, radioed a stark human question. Have sunk submarine. 30 to 40 men in water. Shall Icarus pick up any of men? This victory underscored the effectiveness of even smaller, well-equipped U.S. Everett. Craft in anti-submarine warfare operations. Behind these operational successes, a quiet revolution was taking place in naval training and intelligence. Improved anti-submarine warfare schools, equipped with British-style mechanical attack teachers, rigorously drilled crews in anti-submarine tactics. These sophisticated simulators allowed crews to practice detecting, tracking, and attacking submerged targets, honing their skills in a controlled environment. Concurrently, analytical expertise at Eastern Sea Frontier Headquarters, spearheaded by brilliant reserve officers like physicist Harry H. Hess and statistician Robert Wolfe, meticulously analyzed U-boat movements and attack patterns. Their work transformed raw intelligence into actionable strategies, enhancing the Navy's capabilities far beyond its initial reactive posture. By June 1942, the strategic landscape of the Battle of the Atlantic had dramatically shifted. Admiral Donitz, despite overseeing a burgeoning U-boat production that supplied 30 new boats per month, made a critical decision. He withdrew the last 2 U-boats from off Hatteras by July 19th, transferring the main effort away from the U.S. and offering the main effort away from the U.S. seaboard. The American coast, once a shooting season, and great American turkey shoot for his U-boats, had simply become too dangerous. Donitz's assessment was clear. The concentrated targets and improved escort effectiveness had made coastal operations untenable, forcing the U-boat fleet to seek new hunting grounds in the mid-Atlantic, where a vast air coverage gap still existed. This strategic retreat was exacerbated by Adolf Hitler's maddening strategic intuitions. His misguided insistence on diverting a significant number of U-boats to static patrol off Norway to prevent a perceived and ultimately unrealized Allied invasion gravely compromised the tonnage war. Donitz, who viewed tonnage destruction as Germany's only offensive means, was deeply frustrated by this diversion, which prevented him from fully exploiting the critical time-limited advantage his U-boats held before Allied defenses solidified. This strategic blunder, driven by Hitler's land-centric focus, proved to be a decisive factor in the Atlantic battle. Further tipping the balance, the Allies systematically began to close the mid-Atlantic air gap. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, the deployment of 80 very long-range aircraft, specifically Consolidated Liberator 4-engine bombers, was agreed upon. These VLR Liberators, equipped with advanced microwave, 10-centimeter, radar, and Lee lights, began operating in April-May 1943, creating a continuous air umbrella, denying U-boats safe havens. Donitz, anticipating irreparable losses, recognized the profound threat posed by these aircraft, as they denied his U-boats the surface transit time and refueling opportunities they needed to operate effectively. The final, decisive blow came from the realm of intelligence. On December 13, 1942, Bletchley Park announced the breaking of the Triton, or Shark, cipher, the complex fourth-rotor Enigma code that had temporarily rendered Allied code-breaking semi-blind to U-boat movements. This breakthrough provided critical real-time intelligence on U-boat movements and intentions, allowing Allied convoys to be rerouted around wolf packs and hunter-killer groups to be vectored directly to their prey. The breaking of Triton provided the ultra-intelligence that, coupled with technological advancements and strategic shifts, became indispensable in securing the Atlantic. The Black May of 1943, when 41 U-boats were destroyed in a single month, symbolized the definitive end of the happy time and the beginning of the U-boats' eventual defeat. The Allies had gained the upper hand, and while the Battle of the Atlantic would rage on for 2 more years, the U-boat threat, once an existential peril, was now contained, ensuring the vital supply lines remained open for the ultimate Allied victory. The early German U-boat campaign against US coastal shipping was more than just a series of attacks. It was the most significant and costly defeat suffered by the United States in World War II, a true Atlantic Pearl Harbor that dwarfed the Pacific attack in its raw drain on resources and material. Within 6 months, nearly 400 Allied ships carrying vital supplies, oil, and troops had been sunk in American protected waters, claiming the lives of almost 5,000 merchant seamen, naval personnel, and civilians. These staggering losses imperiled Britain's ability to continue the war and cast a dark shadow over the West's capacity to supply the Soviet Union, threatening to prolong the global conflict indefinitely. Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, bore substantial, if often dissembled, responsibility for this catastrophe. His initial claims of improvising defenses with fishing boats and civilian air patrols were, in hindsight, disingenuous, masking a slow, often resistant response that failed to adopt proven anti-submarine tactics. King's record, unlike the exhaustive inquiries faced by figures like Admiral Husband E. Kimmel for Pearl Harbor, remained largely unexamined, his accountability obscured amidst the fog and noise of war. Yet, from the brink of this disaster, the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic eventually turned. The Allied victory was a complex tapestry woven from rapid technological advancements like radar sonar, the devastating Hedgehog and Moosetrap projectors, and the Fido acoustic torpedo. American industrial might proved decisive, churning out Liberty ships at an astonishing rate, ultimately outproducing German U-boat construction. Strategic bombing campaigns against German U-boat yards further delayed the introduction of advanced electroboats, which might have prolonged the conflict. These combined efforts, coupled with critical intelligence breakthroughs, fundamentally secured the vital Atlantic supply lines. The long-term significance of the Battle of the Atlantic and the critical command failures of its early stages continue to shape historical understanding. King's dissembled responsibility for the U.S. Navy's failures remains a stark reminder of how high-level decisions, or the lack thereof, can have devastating consequences, and how accountability can sometimes be sidestepped in the aftermath of a monumental struggle. Decades later, the moral complexities of the U-boat war were laid bare at the Nuremberg trials. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat arm, was convicted for waging aggressive war. But his sentence was notably impacted by the Tuckoweke defense, where Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz provided an affidavit confirming the U.S. Navy's own practice of unrestricted submarine warfare. As author Rebecca West eloquently noted, that submarine warfare cannot be carried on without inhumanity, and that we have found ourselves able to be inhumane. This nostra culpa of the conquerors might well be considered the most important thing that happened at Nuremberg, but it evoked no response at the time, and it has been forgotten. Beyond the strategic and legal frameworks, the human element endures. A persistent myth from the era suggests that German U-boats routinely shot survivors in lifeboats. Historical records and the accounts of commanders like Reinhard Hardegen, whose U-123 spearheaded the drumbeat offensive, challenge this narrative. Hardegen, despite his aggressive tactics, was known for instances of profound compassion. He provided food, water, and even a knife to the survivors of the Culebra, charting a course for Bermuda. He personally led a neutral Swedish ship to the lifeboats of the Pan Norway, ensuring the rescue of its crew. He later reflected on the terrible emotion he felt upon reading the fates of the men from ships he had sunk. This code of seamen, even amidst the brutality of war, sometimes transcended national allegiance. Decades after the war, in a poignant moment of reconciliation, Hardegen met Wilfred Larsen, a motorman whose tanker had been sunk by a U-boat in 1942. Larsen, still haunted by his near-death experience, sought out his former executioner and saviour. Hardegen, embodying the sentiment, "We were seamen at that time, enemies yesterday, friends today," knelt and tied Larsen's shoelace, a gesture of profound healing that allowed Larsen to finally feel all that had happened to me long ago was gone and forgotten. This mastery of the Atlantic, hard-won and at immense cost, was the indispensable prerequisite for the Normandy invasion and the eventual defeat of Germany, cementing its place as the longest, most complex and in many ways the most morally intricate battle of World War II.